A 10-year-old mechanic girl from a forgotten industrial town just solved what the nation's top engineers couldn't, a malfunction in a $1 million prototype truck engine that had sat silent for months. With no formal training, no shiny tools, and no backup, she walked in with nothing but a battered toolbox, pure instinct, and a promise to her ailing little brother. In less than 10 minutes, the engine roared back to life, and so did the hope of a family that was running on empty. The mechanic girl they once dismissed became the name no one could stop talking about. Before we dive in, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. Snow tapped gently against the frostbitten windows of apartment 6C as Olivia Wren pressed her forehead to the glass, watching the last of the night shift workers disappear into the blizzard. Across the street stood the hollow skeleton of the old Cortland Motor Works, once the heartbeat of this Rust Belt town, now a crumbling ghost. Windows shattered and walls scabbed with rust. Behind her, a weak cough rattled from the couch where her 7-year-old brother, Milo, lay curled under a patchwork quilt, the kind of cough that made grown men wince. "Liv, can you give me a hand?" her father, Henry Wren, called from the kitchen, his voice hoarse with fatigue. He sat hunched over a folding table, papers spread like fallen leaves, overdue bills, hospital notices, and a pink eviction warning that hadn't even been opened yet. At 42, Henry looked twice his age. Years on the assembly line had stolen the color from his hair and the strength from his spine. When Olivia slid into the chair across from him, her eyes darted to the hospital bill for £3.112. $89, a number she couldn't fully grasp, but knew meant trouble. "And still," she whispered, "what do we do now, Daddy?" He didn't answer, just shook his head, shoulders trembling. The storm outside had quieted by morning, but the silence in the Wren apartment was deafening. Olivia sat on the floor beside Milo, his wheezing more frequent now, the kind that came from somewhere deep, like the lungs themselves were begging for air. Henry stared at the wall. The man who once built engines with his bare hands now couldn't fix the one thing that mattered most, his son's failing body. "You should take him to the clinic again," Olivia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "With what, honey?" he asked. "Not unkindly. I've already got a stack of bills higher than the fridge." She didn't reply, just sat there, feeling the weight of being helpless. Until a voice crackled through the old radio on the counter, the one Mrs. Daly from next door had loaned them when their TV broke. The local station was running a late-night replay. Olivia wasn't paying much attention, until she heard 5 words that snapped her upright. $1 million in cash? The announcer's tone shifted from the usual drudgery into something electric. Ashland Motors is offering a $1 million prize to anyone who can solve the failure in their prototype truck engine. The design team has been stumped for months. But get this, the challenge is open to the public. No credentials required, just results. Olivia's breath caught. Her father chuckled bitterly. "Yeah, because that kind of fairy tale happens to people like us." But Olivia didn't laugh. Her mind was already turning fast. She stood up. "What if it's not a fairy tale?" Henry looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "Liv, Mr. Gordon said I'm better with carburetors than half the guys at his garage." She insisted. "Obi says I've got hands made for engines." Obi Gordon, the retired mechanic who ran the small repair shop 2 streets over, had taken Olivia under his wing since she was 5. When other kids played with dolls, she was holding wrenches. When her mom was still alive, she used to joke. This one was born with motor oil in her blood. "I've been listening to machines for years," she added, her voice trembling but steady. "I feel what's wrong before I even test it." Henry rubbed his face with his calloused hands. "Sweetheart, this isn't some busted lawnmower. It's a $1 million prototype." "I know," she said. "But what if it's something simple? Something the smart folks missed because they were trying too hard?" He didn't respond. Instead, he stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the rusting shell of Cortland Motor Works, a graveyard of lost livelihoods. "Even if you wanted to try," he said softly, "how would we even get near that engine?" There was a beat of silence, and then a knock at the door. It was Obie Gordon, snow-dusted cap in hand, eyes warm with something Olivia couldn't quite name. "You heard the broadcast?" she asked him. "Sure did," he replied, "and I also heard someone around here might be brave enough or crazy enough to give it a shot." Olivia's face lit up. "You think I could do it? I've seen you breathe life into engines everyone else gave up on. If anyone's got a shot, it's you." Henry blinked. "You're not seriously?" "I am," Obie said, cutting him off. "And I'll drive her there myself. I've still got friends at Ashland. I'll get her in the building. After that, it's up to her." Henry looked between the two of them, torn between fear and something dangerously close to hope. Finally, he sighed, nodded, and knelt down in front of his daughter. "You really think you can fix something the best engineers in the country couldn't?" "I don't know," she said. "But if it means Milo can breathe again, I have to try." And just like that, a 10-year-old girl with a heart full of fire and pockets full of nothing took her first step toward the impossible. They arrived at the Ashland Motors testing facility just after sunrise. It towered over the horizon like a cathedral of steel and glass, a place so far removed from the rust and mildew of Olivia's neighborhood that it might as well have existed in another dimension. Obie's rust-red pickup rattled into the pristine parking lot, its tailpipe coughing like an old smoker. They parked between two sleek electric sedans that looked like they'd sneer if they could. "Remember," Obie said as he helped Olivia down from the truck, "just because they wear suits doesn't mean they're smarter than you. Most of them wouldn't know a cracked manifold if it bit them in the leg." Olivia nodded, her face pale but determined. In her hands was a manila folder filled with pencil sketches, handwritten theories, and her own crayon-colored diagram of an airflow correction module she'd dreamed up last fall. It wasn't polished, but it was hers. Inside, the lobby sparkled marble floors, glass walls, and a giant rotating hologram of the Ashland prototype engine floated in the center like a mechanical sun. A receptionist in a sharp blazer arched an eyebrow when she saw them. "Can I help you?" Obie cleared his throat. "She's here about the $1 million challenge." The receptionist blinked. Olivia stepped forward. There weren't any age restrictions in the announcement. "I checked." The woman didn't argue, just made a polite, tight-lipped phone call. Minutes later, a man in a charcoal gray vest and horn-rimmed glasses descended from the mezzanine. "I'm Russell Granger, head of R&D, he said, eyeing Olivia like she was a science fair project that wandered in from the parking lot. "You're really applying for this?" "Yes, sir," Olivia said, handing him the folder. He skimmed the pages. His eyes lingered longer than expected on one sketch. Then he closed the folder slowly and said, "Well, we've had stranger applicants." She passed the written assessment, then a practical one. Each test, more people gathered to watch. By day's end, Olivia, the kid from the wrong zip code with patched jeans and grease under her nails, was one of 7 finalists chosen to move on to the final challenge. But that night, as she sat on the couch beside Milo, carefully reorganizing her tools in Pastor Dan's old tackle box, something in her chest twisted. Milo's breathing had worsened, his lips were pale, and his eyes fluttered every few minutes like someone drowning in his sleep. Their father paced the kitchen in silence, pretending to read another job rejection letter. "Should we take him to the ER again?" Olivia asked. With what Henry replied, voice cracking. They're already threatening to send us to collections. There was a long, terrible pause. Then the phone rang. Henry answered. He went quiet. Then, suddenly, his hand shook, and the receiver clattered to the floor. What is it? Olivia asked. It's social services, he whispered. They're sending someone over, said the school nurse, flagged Milo's condition. They want to evaluate whether this place is safe for you two. The world tilted sideways. In less than an hour, a woman named Clara Bell, with a crisp badge and an expression of practiced neutrality, was sitting in their tiny living room. We understand times are hard. Mr. Wren, she said gently. But Milo's been out of school for nearly 3 weeks. He hasn't been seen by a primary care physician in over a month. That puts him in a high-risk category. Henry sat slumped, defeated. Olivia stood tall. We're doing our best. I'm about to fix everything. Clara blinked. I qualified for the Ashland Engine Challenge. If I win, we'll get the money. We can pay for treatment, for everything. Clara's face softened for the first time. Is that so? I just need one more day, Olivia pleaded. One chance. Please don't take him away. Don't split us up. There was a silence so thick it felt like a second heartbeat. Finally, Clara nodded slowly. I'll file a temporary extension, but someone will follow up. Soon. And just like that, everything changed. Now, Olivia wasn't just trying to win a contest. She was racing against a system, against time, against sickness, against the kind of despair that quietly steals families while no one's watching. She looked at Milo sleeping on the couch, chest rising in slow, uneven waves. Then she whispered to herself, just one more day. That's all I need. The next morning, the sky over Ashland was the color of steel. Inside the massive testing warehouse, tension buzzed like static. 7 finalists were led into the prep area, each given a numbered station, a clipboard, and an hour to face what Ashland's engineers had deemed the impossible engine, a next-gen prototype that, on paper, should have worked, but it never had. Each expert before them had failed to make it run, not for lack of intelligence, just something was off. Something no one could explain. Olivia stood quietly beside Station Number 5, her toolbox clutched tightly. The others around her were seasoned mechanics, engineers. One even had a PhD embroidered on his jacket. They brought equipment that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Hers was a dented box with cracked leather handles. But in her heart, she wasn't afraid. She remembered what Obi told her, don't wrestle the engine. Listen to it. Before the test began, a woman stepped into the prep area, auburn hair, grease under her nails, and a quiet confidence that caught Olivia's attention instantly. You must be Olivia, she said. I'm Emma Sterling. Sterling like Obi Sterling. Emma smiled. That's my dad. They shook hands, both girls recognizing in each other a kindred spirit, someone who wasn't raised by textbooks, but by machines that spoke through vibration and smell and sound. You nervous? Emma asked. A little, Olivia admitted. You'll be fine. People like us, we don't overthink. We feel... Then came the announcement. Candidates, please proceed to your workstations. You have 60 minutes. Begin. Olivia walked toward the engine. Her breath steadied. It was beautiful, compact, complex, pristine, and yet something about it felt wrong, not broken, just misunderstood. She touched the casing. Cold, lifeless, like it had given up trying to be heard. The first thing she did wasn't open it. She closed her eyes and listened. All around her, the room clanged with activity, torque wrenches clicking, screens beeping, candidates calling out diagnostics. But Olivia stood still, She slowly rotated the crankshaft by hand, then tilted her head and ran her fingers along the edge of the intake. There was a faint clicking noise, rhythmic, but offbeat. She opened the side panel and gasped. A single bolt on the flywheel was off by less than a millimeter. Tiny so small no scanner would catch it, but enough to throw the timing just slightly out of sync. 30 engineers missed this, she whispered. It wasn't carelessness, it was expectation. They were looking for complex failures, but sometimes the most advanced systems fail for the simplest reasons. The problem wasn't the machine. The problem was how people stopped listening to it. Across the room, one man cursed and slammed down a ratchet. Another candidate asked for more time. But at station number 5, Olivia reached for her smallest socket wrench and turned the bolt not with force, but with understanding. Just one quiet click. She stepped back, wiped her hands on her jeans, and flipped the ignition. The engine roared to life. Not violently, but like it had been waiting, like it had been hoping someone would come along who finally saw it for what it was. A symphony of perfect rhythm erupted across the warehouse. The judges stared in disbelief. Observers gasped. One of the engineers dropped his clipboard. Bartholomew Granger, the head of the challenge, stepped forward with wide eyes. "Miss Wren, what did you do?" Olivia shrugged. "I listened, that's all." For the first time, the men in suits didn't see a little girl. They saw an engineer, a mechanic, a fixer, a force of nature. The sound of the engine still echoed in Olivia's ears as she stood in the center of that giant lab covered in oil, heart pounding, and surrounded by stunned silence. Bartholomew Granger approached her with slow, deliberate steps, like he wasn't sure if she was real. You just made that engine run," he said. "Yes, sir," Olivia replied, her voice quiet but sure. "And no one helped you?" "No, sir." He stared at her a moment longer, then chuckled in disbelief. "Well, then I suppose I owe you $1 million. A wave of gasps rippled through the room. Someone clapped. Then another. And suddenly, the lab filled with applause, not polite or patronizing, but full, thunderous respect. For a 10-year-old girl in muddy boots and a second-hand hoodie, who had just solved what 30 certified engineers couldn't, Emma Sterling ran over and wrapped Olivia in a hug. "You did it!" She laughed, tears in her eyes. "I knew you would." Olivia smiled, but it didn't fully reach her eyes. Her mind had already raced ahead. "Milo!" She turned to Bartholomew. "Sir, I need to ask something." He raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "Can the prize money be transferred right away? My brother's in the hospital. He needs emergency care specialists. It can't wait." There was a brief pause as the weight of her words landed. Then Bartholomew nodded. "We'll get the legal team moving now. I'll personally make sure funds are released within 24 hours. Obi, who had arrived just in time to hear the last part of the test, stepped forward. His eyes glistened. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. He just placed his weathered hand on Olivia's shoulder and said, "You fixed it, kid. And you did it your way." They left the facility as the sun dipped low behind the glass towers of Ashland. But Olivia didn't see the city. She didn't see the press gathering at the gates or the congratulatory emails pinging into Granger's phone. She saw only Milo pale, struggling to breathe, waiting, at the hospital. Henry stood in the hallway holding a clipboard full of numbers and codes that might as well have been written in another language. His eyes locked on Olivia as she ran toward him. "Daddy, we got it. The money. It's real. It's ours." He dropped the clipboard. Then he dropped to his knees. And for the first time in months, he cried. Not from fear, but from relief. Later that evening, as paramedics prepared Milo for emergency transfer to one of the best pediatric pulmonology centers in the state, the lead doctor pulled Henry aside. Who do we thank for the funding authorization? Henry looked at Olivia, who stood beside the stretcher, holding her brother's hand and whispering softly about how the next hospital would have robot beds and therapy dogs and windows that opened. You thank her, he said. My daughter fixed an engine, and it changed everything. They watched as the ambulance doors closed, Olivia seated inside next to Milo, wearing those same oil-stained overalls. But now, she wasn't just a mechanic's daughter anymore. She was proof that sometimes the biggest opportunities don't come to the smartest, the strongest, or the richest. Sometimes, they come to the ones who dare to listen. The ambulance hummed like a living thing as it sped toward Indianapolis, its red lights painting the highway in flickers of warning and urgency. Inside! Olivia sat strapped into a jump seat, her small hand tightly clutching Milo's pale fingers. Machines beeped steadily around them. An oxygen mask clung to his face. His chest rose and fell with the help of a ventilator, but his eyelids fluttered, fighting to stay open. You did it. Live, he mumbled. She leaned closer, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. Don't talk. Just rest. We're going somewhere better now. And she meant it, not just the hospital. Everything was about to get better. But it hadn't hit her yet. The weight of what she'd done. It wasn't until they rolled into Riley Children's Hospital, with its soaring glass atrium and warm-colored walls that smelled of lavender and soap, not bleach, that the change began to sink in. A man in a navy blue coat approached them at the ER bay. His name tag read, Dr. Everett Lane, Chief of Pediatric Pulmonology. You must be the miracle mechanic, he said with a kind smile. Olivia looked down, embarrassed. I'm just... Olivia. No, he corrected. You're the reason this boy's getting a second chance. And that's when she realized she wasn't just Milo's sister anymore. She was someone now. The days that followed were a whirlwind of oxygen tanks, specialized medications, and a team of doctors who listened not just to the machines, but to Olivia's voice. When she spoke, they paused. When she explained how Milo's breathing sounded different after stair climbs or weather shifts. They nodded and took notes. It wasn't just respect, it was trust. One afternoon, while Milo napped under a soft fleece blanket decorated with stars, Dr. Lane pulled Olivia aside. You have a remarkable sense for how things work, he said. Have you ever thought about engineering school? I'm 10, she replied, wide-eyed. He smiled. Then we better start planning early. She'd never thought about college before. College was for other kids, rich kids. Kids whose dads didn't fall asleep reading past due notices or whose moms didn't leave before the mortgage disappeared. But now, for the first time, Olivia let herself imagine a future not just survival, not just getting through the next week or bill or diagnosis. She imagined building things, designing things, helping people the way she helped Milo by listening, by understanding. Back in Steelton, things began to change too. Word of Olivia's win swept through the community like spring wind after a long, frozen winter. The Wren family's eviction notice was rescinded. Henry got calls from shops and factories that had ignored his applications for years. Pastor Dan offered to host a fundraiser, but now not for bills, for scholarships. Mrs. Patel from the corner store put up a picture of Olivia in the window beside her homemade pie sign. Under it, she wrote, She fixed more than an engine. She fixed our hope. But Olivia didn't let it go to her head. Every day she visited Milo, toolbox in hand. She'd sit beside his bed, tightening his IV stand screws or repairing his toy truck with surgical precision. One nurse called her the girl who can fix anything. But Olivia just smiled and whispered, Not everything. Not yet. Because what she really wanted to fix was time. Time they'd lost. Time Milo spent coughing instead of laughing. time their father spent begging for odd jobs instead of sleeping. But she was learning. Even if you can't fix everything, you can start with one thing, and sometimes, one thing is enough to change everything else. 3 weeks after Milo was admitted, the snow in Steelton began to melt. And with it, something else began to thaw the hearts of a town that had long forgotten how to believe in miracles. The newspapers called her the Wrench Wonder. Local TV stations ran features titled, "From Rust to Riches, the girl who fixed an engine and her family's fate." But for Olivia Wren, fame didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like quiet, like the sound of her brother sleeping through the night for the first time in months. It felt like relief watching her father finally smile without flinching, seeing him fix their broken porch steps just because he wanted to, not because someone was demanding it. It felt like possibility, like she could choose what came next, instead of constantly reacting to what went wrong. On the day Milo was released from the hospital, Olivia held the door open for him as he stepped into the sunlight. A little unsteady, but beaming. "I'm hungry," he said, rubbing his stomach. "We'll get pancakes." She smiled, with the smiley faces, like we used to. They laughed, and Henry behind them, holding a bag full of prescriptions and fresh hope, chuckled. It was the first time Olivia had heard him laugh like that in years. Later that afternoon, they returned to their apartment building. But something was different. Neighbors poured into the hallways, clapping, cheering, hugging. Mrs. Tillman from 4C handed Olivia a box of homemade cookies. Pastor Dan gave Milo a toy robot with flashing lights. And taped to the apartment door was a giant banner made from brown wrapping paper and markers. "Welcome home, hero." That evening, Olivia sat on the steps outside, looking at the fading sky. Obi joined her, sitting down with a creak in his old bones. "Feels different now, doesn't it?" he asked. She nodded. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong." He chuckled. "It might. That's life. But you changed the story, kid. Not just yours. All of ours." She was quiet for a moment. "Obie, why me?" He looked at her, really looked. "Because you saw what no one else could, not with your eyes, with your heart. That engine didn't just need fixing, it needed understanding, and you gave it that." She blinked, her eyes glassy. "I just didn't want to lose him." Obi nodded slowly. "Love's the best tool there is." A month later, Olivia stood on the stage of Ashland Motors' main auditorium, oversized hard hat in one hand, a scholarship certificate in the other. Executives, engineers, and inventors clapped as she gave her acceptance speech for the newly created Olivia Wren Initiative for Young Engineers, a program designed to give kids from working-class families access to real-world training and mentorship. She stood at the mic, took a deep breath, and said, "They say this engine was impossible to fix. But maybe the real problem wasn't the machine. Maybe it was the way people gave up on it too soon. My name's Olivia Wren. I'm 10 years old, and I didn't fix the engine because I was smarter. I fixed it because I listened. Because sometimes the answer isn't complicated, it's just quiet." The room went still. And then, a standing ovation. Back home that night, Milo was building a Lego truck on the floor. Henry was making dinner. The lights were on. The fridge was full. Olivia sat by the window, notebook in her lap, sketching something new, an engine design of her own. Outside, Steelton still looked tired. But it didn't feel broken anymore. Because sometimes, all it takes is a kid with a wrench, a heart full of love, and the courage to believe in small, simple things to remind a whole town that nothing is ever too far gone to fix. Not a machine, not a family, not a future. There's a reason Olivia's story moved an entire town to tears. It wasn't just about the $1 million, or the engine. It was about the truth that often goes unspoken. Sometimes the world underestimates those with the most heart. Olivia didn't have a degree, a title, or fancy tools. What she did have was love raw, relentless, and unapologetic. Love for her brother, for her father, for a machine that others had abandoned. She listened when others lectured. She observed when others assumed. And in that quiet space between hopelessness and courage, she found her power. The world tells us that problems are complicated, that only experts can fix what's broken. But Olivia proved something simpler. Sometimes the answers are small, sometimes the wisdom is young, and sometimes the ones who change the world are the ones no one saw coming. The end. Up next, 2 more true stories that'll move your heart and make you believe again. Click to keep watching and hit subscribe if you know that hope deserves a second chance.